Sravanamangalam Srimadavitam Pravigunanti Puridajana. Yesterday, towards the end, we were discussing some of the common obstacles that we encounter in our spiritual life, like laziness, lack of a strong will, the tendency to procrastinate, to postpone spiritual practices, weakness of mind, and so on. Now, Sri Ramakrishna explains this tendency with the help of a parable. The parable teaches us that without some of those qualities which are normally required for success in material life, spiritual life also cannot be successful. See, normally in material life, we need intelligence, we need the ability to understand people, to discriminate and to understand people. So strong will, determination, iron determination. All these qualities are perseverance, tenacity. All these are required. There is a reason why Sri Ramakrishna stresses this point. We have a wrong notion in all devotional traditions, in all world religions, a wrong notion that a devotee should be weak, somewhat gullible, could be taken for a ride by clever people. See, you have to remember the great statement of Plato. There are crooks in the world because there are fools. Without fools, there cannot be crooks. So he says, I hate evil men because they do evil things. I hate good men because through their complacency, they allow evil men to do evil things. So, this is a very, very important point we have to remember. I can give an example. Sri Ramakrishna's life is a great example. He was very intelligent, very practical. He didn't allow anyone to take him for a ride. The most classic example you find in the life of Swami Vivekananda in America during his days when he was traveling in this country, preaching from 1893 till 1896 December. In that month he left for Europe. He was preaching in this country. Now, Vivekananda, during his wandering days in India, won't touch money with his hand. If anybody offered him any help, he will ask them to buy him a ticket to the next destination. He won't keep money in his hand. He lived in the streets. He was sometimes guest of kings in their palaces, and sometimes he shared a humble meal with common passers-by. So he won't keep 1 cent in his pocket. He won't keep money at all. The same Vivekananda was in America. He had arranged a contract with the lecture bureau. They were very clever people, as usual. They arranged lectures for him. They charged fees, took all the money. And Swamiji later found out that they were really taking him for a ride. And he terminated that contract. You may ask the question, a saint, a great prophet, why should he worry about this? So why should Jesus take the trouble to take a whip in his hand and drive away the moneylenders from his father's temple? So you find this is a very important principle to be remembered. A spiritual seeker has to be intelligent, has to be realistic, should be able to discriminate and understand who is who and what is what. Otherwise, there cannot be success in spiritual life. You may come across one rare exception. Such exceptions are found in Hindu mystical tradition and also in Christian mystical tradition. One exception in Christian mystical tradition is Saint Joseph, Saint Lucifer. Sometimes he's called the flying saint. He was born as an extremely, apparently dull person. And he had to go to school with children the same age, maybe 10 years, 9 years. And his father was a drunkard and alcoholic. Mother was a strong-willed woman who practically dominated the whole household. She was trying to look after the whole family. And this young man, 21, 22 years old, had to be sent to the same school along with small children because he was so dull, he couldn't learn anything. And the only thing he could do was to sit there somewhere staring at a distant object, which he didn't know what it was. Now, this man later became a great saint. He's not Saint Joseph. His name is Saint Lucifer. He was born in Italy. He was born in 17th century and was declared a saint most probably in 1730. He is supposed to be the saint of students preparing for examinations and also pilots, because he was so unclever. That's the term sometimes used to call him. Not a very happy expression. Now, the reason was somehow his mother got him admitted into a monastery where his own uncle, this boy's uncle, the young man's uncle, was an important senior clergyman. And then he had to be expelled from there because he couldn't do anything, he could not focus his mind on anything. But whenever he heard the church bells, his mind went to an ecstasy. Now, this man, finally, a prominent church official, maybe an archbishop, he discovered that there was something special about this dull-witted person. He had an inner, instinctive spiritual orientation, which no normal clergyman didn't have, priest didn't have. So this archbishop helped him, and he was allowed to appear for an examination. And along with other junior clergymen, he also appeared for the examination. And in fact, he had only memorized one parable from most probably St. Luke. And the parable is about the lost sheep. When the shepherd loses one of the sheep, he will lose everything. He will leave everything behind and go in search of that. So that was the only parable that he had memorized. And it so happened that was the very parable which he was asked to recite by the examination board. And he could do that so marvelously well because that was the only thing he was repeating all the time in his mind. He didn't know anything else. So sometimes he is called the patron saint of students preparing for examination. But the important point was he was so pure that whenever he heard the church bells ringing, his mind would go into an ecstasy. Such rare exceptions are found in spiritual literature. And you find Prahlada, the king of devotees, according to Sri Ramakrishna, he was the greatest of devotees. He was born a devotee. Right from his infancy, he had heard the story of God, spiritual ideas. Narada, the great rishi, came and taught his mother. One day he came to his mother's place, hermitage, and taught the mother how to pray, how to meditate, and the little child, baby that is growing in the mother's womb, imbibed all these spiritual ideas, and he was born as a great devotee. Such rare examples are found, but there are only exceptions. For a spiritual seeker, he has to keep his eyes open. he cannot afford to be foolish. Sri Ramakrishna makes the point, don't become a bokka, become a bhakta, not become, I mean, the Bengali expression is like that. Don't be a fool, be a devotee. Now, so a devotee, a spiritual seeker, has to have a tremendous sense of tenacity, strong determination, iron will, perseverance, and the ability to understand people. Before going to the parable, I can give a very simple example from Sri Ramakrishna's life itself. When Sri Ramakrishna was living in Dakshineshwar, he was living in a small room. Outside, there was another gentleman living. His name was Azra. Now, he was the very antithesis of whatever Sri Ramakrishna was. Sri Ramakrishna naturally went into samadhi. Whenever the thought of God came to him, whenever he heard anything that reminded him of God or spiritual realization. Now, but he never made a pretension about it. Everything was within. He was so intense, and all the time he was in a transcendental mood. Hazra, what he did first, every day he will make a long mark with sandal paste and vibhuti. Vibhuti is ashes, which normally put by devotees. And tulasi leaves here on both sides. And a big tiger skin hanging right in front of his door with a thick rudraksha garland. Normally rudraksha, you cannot wear a huge rudraksha. It is used for counting the days, so it should be normal size. But this man wanted to make people understand what a great devotee he was. But occasionally, and whenever some rich prominent people came from Calcutta to visit Sri Ramakrishna, he will call them, you come here. He will invite them. And occasionally he will ask for little money also. He was working as a marriage broker in the midst of all this. Sri Ramakrishna had a soft corner for him. After all, instead of doing all this in the street, he was sitting in the temple. So that shows this man had some spiritual culture. Though he was somewhat of a perverted person, still, in God's empire, devotees of all classes have a place. There is a statement in Gita, Apto Jijnasur Artharthi Jnani. It means the one who prays to God for some material benefits. The one who is inquisitive about God, wants to know about God. And those who want material wealth from God. And those who have realized that God is the only reality. There are 4 different types of devotees. Among them, the lower types, those who are helpless and in a state of helplessness, are compelled to pray to God. And those who pray to God for material benefits. Even they have a place in God's empire. So Hazra also had a place in the divine play that was Sri Ramakrishna's life. So, but again he will try to, sometimes he will try to dissuade people from the real path. But Sri Ramakrishna used to scold him frequently. This also you find in spiritual life. In fact, this is a common factor in non-theological traditions. In Christianity, the archangel was expelled from heaven. No, archangel has become a counter-recruiting agency. So he wants to recruit people to his camp. If you read Milton's Paradise Lost, the archangel sits in a corner and tries to waylay people who are going towards God. You find the same thing in Islam also. Iblis refused to bow down before man because man was the most glorious creation of Allah. So he also tries to take people away from the path of God. This is found in Hindu mythological tradition. Sometimes it is given it is anthropomorphized in the human dimension. Sometimes it is treated as a theory of error. I mean, Kali it is called. Kali is a counterforce which tries to drag people away from spiritual path. So only a spiritual seeker who is intelligent and who has the intelligence, the ability to understand people, who is the right type of people, what is the right idea that he should learn, and what's the right type of people whom he should associate with. Otherwise, a devotee cannot reach the fulfillment in spiritual life. Sri Ramakrishna makes a very interesting story here. The determination, tenacity, perseverance, all these qualities are stressed, indisputable. Once there was a great drought in a country, and all the husbandmen were busy bringing water into their field by digging canals. One of them was a man of great determination and had resolved to go on digging until he could connect his canal with the river. So he went on working, though it was getting late for his bath and meal. His wife sent him oil by the daughter. These village farmers, they work hard in the tropical climates. All day they work hard, in the evening they take a bath, oil bath, and they sleep. That's a custom. So the daughter told father, Papa, it's noon. Rub this oil and have your bath. The father replied, wait, I have work still. It was past 2 o'clock and still the peasant gave no thought to his bath or meal. At last, his wife came to the field herself and said, why have you not taken your bath yet? The meal has become cold, the food has become cold, and stay. You always go to extremes. Come away, now at least. Do the rest of the work tomorrow, or after you have taken your food. The man at once grew furious, chased her away with the spade in his hand, calling her names, foolish and senseless woman. He exclaimed, don't you see the crop is drying up, and all of you will have to die of starvation if I don't work hard and irrigate the field? I am determined to bring the water first into the field today, and then to think of food, bath, and other things. The woman, seeing the situation, ran away out of fear. After Herculean labor till late in the night, the man was at last able to carry out his determination. When he saw the water of the river flowing into the field with a murmuring noise, his delight knew no bounds. Then coming home, he asked his wife to bring some oil and prepare a pipe of tobacco. He wanted to have a bath and smoke and food, that's it. After bath and meal, he slept soundly. This sort of determination is the right illustration of intense vairagya. It means complete dispassion for worldly comforts, and also a strong determination to practice spiritual sadhana, to do spiritual practices. So this is the right illustration of what a spiritual seeker should be. Then another illustration is given, the latter part of the parable. Another person was also engaged in the same task. But when his wife came and asked him to come home, he followed her without any protest. Laying the instruments on his shoulder, he said, well, as you have come, I must go. Means, if you had not asked me to come home, I would have continued this work. So there, what he does, he is lazy, he wants to take rest, eat and sleep before completing his task. but he gives a justification. Because you requested me, so I am coming home. And what happened? This man could never succeed in the task he had undertaken. Because next day morning he found the canal, the work that he had already done, cutting the canal, had already been filled up. So he had to start the work all over again. Again and again he had to do that. Which means he could never actually bring water to the field. Now in spiritual life, this is a problem. The moment we show a tendency for complacency, procrastination, postponement, or lowering the guard, so to speak, in spiritual, what happens? Temptations, negative ideas, negative influences, all may come back and undo whatever we have done. The mind goes back to the previous state, sometimes to a much worse condition than it was before we started the spiritual practices. And this is a real experience for all spiritual seekers. If we do not continuously practice, if we lower the guard, and if we become complacent, then there is also the danger that whatever we have done so far may get undone, because we may not have done much. If we have reached a substantial stage of evolution and growth, then it will become certainly a great help. But it may be of some great help, maybe not in this life, in the next life. I gave you the example of Ajamila, the story of a Brahmin spiritual seeker from the Bhagavad Purana. He was brought up as a pious boy. When he reached his youth, he had a deviation due to bad associations. The whole story is narrated in a very graphic language in the devotional classic. So as a boy, he was brought up as a very pious, God-fearing person. But then he had a deviation because he lowered his guard and he allowed himself to associate with people who diluted his spiritual inclination. And then at the end, when he was approaching his death, we found that when he uttered the name of his son, which happened to be a synonym of God, his earlier memories, childhood days when he was meditating, practicing spirituality, all these earlier memories came to the surface. And that rescued him. But that's because he happened to give God's name to his son. He did not mean to call God's name towards the end of his life. He was actually calling to his son. His son's name happened to be synonym of God. So that this association helped him to remember his younger days, and that memory took him to the memory of God and spiritual ideas. Suppose he had given another name to his son, then he would have to wait for another life to continue from where he had stopped. So that is the importance of tenacity and perseverance. So, again, another important point. Here we are talking about association with fellow spiritual seekers, people who lead spiritual life. That enriches, that reinforces our own spiritual orientation. Even if we quarrel with devotees, fellow devotees, it is good, than to be friendly with the other type of people. You can quarrel with people who are devotees of God. Even that association is helpful than to be very friendly with people who have no spiritual culture, because that could take us away from it. That I quarrel with that person, merely remember it is devotee of God. So that will keep your mind in a level of spiritual consciousness. That point is illustrated in this parable. Sri Ramakrishna was a master storyteller. So it's an interesting parable. Once a fisherman secretly entered into the garden of a certain gentleman at night and was stealthily catching fish in his pond. This gentleman, having come to know of this, ordered his men to surround the place and came with torches to find out the thief. In the meantime, the fisherman, finding no means to escape, sat down underneath a tree like a great spiritual person and started pretending to meditate. With Rudraksha. Maybe he may have kept all this in stock, Some professional robbers will have a full, well-stocked suitcase with all kinds of disguises, So when the people came, they found no thief anywhere, but only a sadhu, a spiritual mendicant, sitting meditating. Next morning, it was known to all the people in the neighborhood that a great sadhu had come there. Now, I shall go fast in this story because we are coming, this story as a message. There is a special reason why I took up this story before coming to the real story, which comes after this. Here, accidentally, through sheer pretension, this man pretended to be a mendicant. And he found the king's soldiers spared him, did not arrest him. They may have even showed him some honor and respect. They were looking for a thief. Instead they found a mendicant, an ascetic sitting, apparently immersed in meditation. So they must have bowed down before him and went through. Then he realized, see, I was living like a thief, a robber. And when I just tried to pretend to be a mendicant, an ascetic, incognito, what honor and respect I received. So why can't I become a real ascetic? And he said that he became an ascetic. So accidental association with spirituality, even that could be of some help. But conscious association with the wrong idea could be dangerous. Accidental association with spiritual idea can become a saving factor, can come to a rescue in spiritual life. But conscious association with the wrong idea, with wrong association, can be very dangerous. In fact, that's the story we are going to take up as a continuation. This is a very, very famous story which Sri Ramakrishna narrates more than once in the Gospel. It shows the importance of proper association. And it also demonstrates one serious problem in spiritual life. If we are immersed in worldliness, then worldly associations become so natural to us and much more dangerous. We develop a tendency to enjoy, to relish worldly associations. That's much more dangerous. This passion for worldliness is the first step in spiritual life. But a passionate attachment, a tendency to enjoy and relish worldliness is much more dangerous because that keeps us in a state of ever bound. That condition doesn't even permit us to get any association with spiritual idea. It's a very famous illustration. A group of fisherwomen who were on their way from a distant market, held on an afternoon, were overtaken by a heavy hailstorm at nightfall. Maybe they must have been returning by boat, so they had to land in they had to come to the shore and take refuge somewhere, and were thus compelled to take shelter in a florist's cottage nearby. So there was a cottage on the seashore, and the lady of the house ran a market for flowers and garlands. So she was a florist. So these fisherwomen reached there and got shelter in the house of this florist. So the kind host allowed them to sleep that night in a room where she had kept some baskets of sweet-smelling flowers for supplying the customers on the next day. So she kept a huge stock of rose flowers, all kinds of sweet-smelling flowers for her customers. The atmosphere of the room, filled with the fragrance of flowers, was too good for the fisherwomen. They couldn't tolerate this beautiful perfume smell of roses because they were accustomed to the not so sweet-smelling perfume for the fish. So they were always living in rooms filled with fish, often stale fish. The baskets where fish were kept may not be washed every day. So that was the smell that they were accustomed to. They were used to. But suddenly one night they were compelled to sleep in a room which is filled with sweet smelling roses and other flowers. So the atmosphere of the room, filled with the fragrance of flowers, was too good for the fisherwomen, and they could not, owing to it, get even a wink of sleep. They couldn't sleep, they were restless. This terrible smell of roses. That's what really happens in spiritual life. Worldly minded people, they cannot tolerate 1 minute of listening, reading scriptures. Suddenly they will have a feeling of restlessness. They want to rush out somewhere. So, if people could associate, it could withstand even a lecture, a prayer, a meditation session, or even atmosphere in a temple or a church or synagogue, whatever may be, holy place. If they could even withstand, they could relish that atmosphere, that means they have spiritual culture. Otherwise they won't be able to withstand it. They will feel restless. They will feel like running away. So, these fisherwomen could not get in a wink of sleep. They were so restless. At last, one of them suggested a remedy. Let us sprinkle, she said, little water on our empty fish baskets and put them close to us. So, sprinkle water in these fish baskets where stale old fish were kept. So, what a wonderful smell. And they sprinkled water, much more smell, and they kept it very close to their nose. So they could sleep beautifully. So, people who are immersed in worldliness, you ask them to meditate, they become restless. You ask them to read a holy book, it's terribly boring to them. They psychologically, they will not be able to withstand. In fact, many of the spiritual seekers refer to this problem. When we try to meditate, sitting quiet in solitude, when we really make an effort to meditate, all kinds of conflicting images, thought currents will flash through the mind, often trying to persuade us to get up from where we are sitting and go somewhere. This problem is mentioned in the commentaries of Patanjali Yoga Sutra by Vyasa and Bhoja. Vyasa Bhashya and Bhoja Vritti, two famous books on Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. So we should not confuse one with the other, mix up one with the other. Obstacles are natural for every spiritual seeker because our mind is like a lake with different layers of tendencies and impressions accumulated over the last several centuries of life and activities. Mind is like a lake with different layers, weeds and grass and dust and filth, and also wonderful layers of clean water. So our mind is full of conflicting tendencies. Many of these tendencies are very helpful, many of them may not be very helpful. When we try to meditate, it's like taking a long pole in our hands and trying to stir the pond. So meditation is like a pond cleaning operation. But without making an effort, this pond can never be cleaned. It should be cleaned somehow. But in the process, sometimes weeds and bacteria, mud, all this will come to the surface. That's part of the game. So at that time what we must do, we must know that this is a natural problem in spiritual life. So if we can't meditate, if the conflicting tendencies become too intense, then we must divert the mind into another direction. If you can't sit and meditate, you read a holy book, or you discuss spiritual ideas. So that practice will not produce a lot of conflicts. Deeper, intense, internal meditative practices can create conflicts, but external spiritual practices like reading, discussion will be helpful and will help us in consolidating and reinforcing spiritual tendencies already accumulated. At the same time, it will not produce so many conflicts. But those who have no spiritual tendencies at all, they will not be able to meditate or do any spiritual practice for a long time, because the mind is not ready. And such practices can even lead to psychological problems. That's why Patanjali lays down a very important role. What is, one should be established in yama and niyama before taking up serious spiritual practices. Yama and niyama are fundamental disciplines, internal and external disciplines. Ahimsa, Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha is yama. Shaucha, Santosha, Tapas, Svadhyaya, Ishvara, Pranidhana is niyama. So, first we must be established in the ideal of non-violence. Then we must be established in truthfulness. Then we must be established in non-stealing, not coveting other people's possessions. Then we must be fully established in chastity, in discipline, moral life. And then we must also try to get established in the ideal of non-receiving gifts indiscriminately. Things which we don't need, we should not accept as gifts, because that may lead to greed and covetousness. The second group of qualifications: purity, internal purity and external purity. And then a feeling of contentment. This contentment is very important. If anybody feels if anybody has an internal feeling of contentment, that's a green signal which shows that we are on the right track. In fact, contentment is a very, very important prerequisite. A feeling that we have achieved something beyond which there is nothing for us to achieve in material world. Then tapa. Tapa means concentration of mind, intellect and the five senses of perception. And then a feeling of surrender to God. So these disciplines help us in slowly preparing the mind for spiritual practices. And perhaps we may be a bit embarrassed, because these are difficult goals to achieve. We may feel that way. But sincere effort sincere effort to practice any of these disciplines will also have its effect, positive effect, in making our mind fit for spiritual practices. So coming back to this parable, so this one of the fisherwomen said, let us sprinkle a little water on our empty fish baskets and put them close to us. That would keep this troublesome smell of flowers from spoiling our sleep. So it's very realistic. If we get bored listening to spiritual ideas, if we feel too lazy to do spiritual practices, it means we are interested in doing something else. I mean, we need fish baskets close by. If we cannot enjoy flower baskets. Because mind is never in a neutral condition. Mind is always active. If mind is not given good food, mind will seek poisonous food, unhealthy, unhygienic food, and mind will fall sick. So, one of the two baskets is necessary. That's the idea behind. Everyone gladly agreed to the proposal and did accordingly, and soon all began to snow. Sri Ramakrishna says, such indeed is the power and influence of habit. So, and habit is nothing but an external manifestation of internal tendency. That's what habit is. Habit is natural to us. Habit is what we normally, naturally do, effortlessly. We may work hard to do certain things. So if we can turn spiritual practice into our regular habits, then we have won half the battle. If we could sublimate our spiritual practices into our natural habits, then that will automatically, effortlessly, naturally go on feeding the mind with positive spiritual tendencies. So first have a good habit, good tendency, and they get the ability to enjoy spiritual practices, the ability to enjoy the perfume, the sweet smell of roses in the basket. That will keep us away from the tendency to enjoy the smell coming from the fish baskets in the parable. One of the two baskets will be there all the time. If we don't positively strive for building spiritual tendencies, then mind will automatically keep building up non-spiritual worldly tendencies. The worldly soul, brought up and accustomed to materialistic thoughts and surroundings, cannot breathe long in an atmosphere of purity or renunciation without feeling restlessness and discomfort. That's the idea behind. So slowly we must develop a tendency to enjoy, develop a faculty and a capacity to enjoy spiritually helpful activities. If not meditation, at least spiritual reading, or at least spiritual music, spiritual painting, anything that is helpful in building up spiritual tendencies. If we can't read the Bible or Gita, we should be able to read at least Aristotle or Kant, that's all. Because that also will take our mind away from the lowest level of sensory consciousness. And then mind will automatically go beyond that stage. That's the idea behind any attempt, any effort to raise the mind from the lowest level of sensory pleasure. And this could be done through music, through painting, through creative art, and of course the royal path is spiritual practices. Then we have achieved the goal. Now, if we do not try to develop this mind of ours into a spiritually helpful friend, a friend in spiritual life, then what happens? The mind can become a tyrannical enemy. That point is stressed in another parable. These parables are highly demonstrative and illustrative. Here Sri Ramakrishna is again speaking about the bane of worldliness, the danger of keeping the mind the lowest level of sensory worldly mindedness. God is like a wish-yielding tree of the celebrated word Kalpataru. It's a mythological concept, mythological tree. If you go and sit under the tree and pray for anything, the tree will fulfill your prayers. Anything that you want. Not necessarily good things, but bad things also. It's a mythological tree, mythological concept. But the story has got a great spiritual message behind it. So God is like the wish-yielding tree of the celebrated tree. Because Sri Ramakrishna in later context said there's a difference, of course. The mythological wish-fulfilling tree has no discrimination. So whatever you pray for, even things which may not be helpful for us, that will be granted by this wish-fulfilling tree. So Kalpataru, that's the subject of discussion in this parable. But God as the wish-fulfilling tree acts at a different level. God doesn't grant you, if you are a sincere devotee, God doesn't grant you a prayer for anything other than what helps you in your spiritual life, what is helpful to you in your spiritual life. That difference is there. We will discuss that point later. So one should be very careful to give up all worldly desires when one's mind has been purified by religious exercises. So before you pray to God for something, you should be very careful. Because otherwise what happens, unconsciously we may utter something which may not eventually be helpful for us in spiritual life. The story is given in the Ramayana. The Ramayana story. Kumbhakarna was a great villain of Ramayana story. Kumbhakarna, he was 6 months of the year he was asleep. And 6 months of the year he was living waking state. But it's a special reason why he became like this. He did spiritual practice. Spiritual means he prayed to God for long years. Long years. His mind was not very pure mind. He had something else in his mind, but he was praying to God. So when God appeared to him, actually he wanted to pray for physical strength, monstrous physical strength, so that he could vanquish all the angels, Indra and others. Indra was the chief of angels, means gods and goddesses. So his real aim was to pray for this monstrous power, so that he could do maximum harm to maximum number of people. That was his aim. But he was a man of tremendous willpower, determination. You find many such villains, scourges of humanity. Lot of willpower, tenacity, perseverance, intelligence, organization, genius. But that intention will be diabolical, evil. Such a man was the demon was Kumbhakarna. So he prayed and meditated for long years. Ultimately, the God felt compelled. This fellow won't stop his prayers. If he could pray with the same intensity for something noble, spiritual, it would have been very wonderful. But the fellow was not ready for that. So he went on praying and meditating. And finally, something had to be done to stop him from continuing his prayer. So God appeared before him. And he asked him, "What do you want?" He wanted to ask Indratum. Indratum means I want the official status of Indra. Indra was the chief of gods and goddesses in mythological stories. I want that position. So that means I should be able to invade his kingdom, drive him away, and I want to sit on his throne. That is what he wanted. But, what happened? Another goddess, Saraswati, she entered his tongue and made him utter nidratu. Nidratu means I want to sleep permanently. Oh. So what he wanted to ask was the position of Indra, the chief of gods. What he happened to ask for was to be always in a state of sleep. But he didn't know what was happening to him because his mind was unsteady. He was so desirous of power so that he could do maximum harm to maximum number of people. So he was so fully drunk in power and pride and ego that he forgot what exactly was happening to him, and eventually he happened to utter the word nidratu, which means a state of permanent laziness, always be in sleep. So he happened to sleep throughout the day and night for whole year. His elder brother, and his elder brother was Ravana, the great villain of Ramayana. Ravana was his elder brother, so you can imagine what kind of younger brother this man must have been. So he came and played it. My younger brother wanted to enjoy this world, and you made him sleep the whole day and night, whole year. As a concession, the God gave him a concession. But 6 months of the year, he will be awake. 6 months of the year, he will be sleeping. Now, the story tells us that unless we are ready to pray for the right boon, we may eventually accidentally pray for the wrong thing, and that could land us in trouble. So mind should be gradually purified before we undertake spiritual practices. Because a purified mind will pray for the right thing, for devotion, for concentration, for purity of mind, and so on. A mind that's pure will not ask for anything worldly minded, anything evil, anything that will be harmful to himself or the rest of the world. So mind should be first made ready for asking for the right boon and for praying in a proper manner. Otherwise, by praying, we may ask for some worldly pleasures, enjoyment, power and status, and God will grant us, and that will eventually land us in trouble. So we should be careful. That's the essence of the story. So Sri Ramakrishna says, just hear a story. A certain traveler came to a large plain in the course of his travels. As he had been walking in the sun for a good many hours, he was thoroughly exhausted and was heavily perspiring. So he sat down in the shade of a tree to take a little rest. Presently he began to think what a wonderful comfort it would be if he could eat a wonderful meal and get a soft bed there to sleep upon. So if I get, this is a very comfortable place, a huge banyan tree with a huge shadow. So he was tired, so he felt so comforted. And after taking rest for some time, he began to dream of what a wonderful thing it will be if I get a good soft bed so that I can sleep, and then a full square meal. The traveler had no idea that he was sitting under the celestial tree, this tree, the mythological tree. As soon as the above thought rose in his mind, he found a nice bed by his side. He felt much astonished, but all the same time he stretched himself out. And suddenly it appeared before him a full square meal. And then he was supremely happy, and then he wanted a lot of other things to drink, so everything was provided before him. But remember, his mind is not actually very steady. He should have thought, God has given me all these, so how kind, how merciful God should be. Ramanuja, in his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, makes a very interesting remark. If a sincere devotee prays to God for something, even material pleasure, promotion, wealth, or whatever it may be, and immediately the God fulfills that desire, then the devotee, if he is sincere, if his mind has some level of mental purity, will feel an obligation, a sense of gratitude to that God, to God who has answered his prayers, who has granted him his boon. Suppose a poor man, if he prays for money, a hungry man, if he prays for food, or if people who are in trouble ask for God's help, nothing wrong in it. According to devotion philosophy, there is nothing wrong on the part of spirit, part of any ordinary human being in praying to God, even for material enjoyment. But remember, that is not the highest prayer. That is not the sign of a highest devotee. But we can always turn to God for help, even for our material needs. Ramanuja says, a genuine devotee later feels grateful to God, who has answered his prayers, who has granted him the boons that he wanted. This gratitude helps him to pray for higher things. He will not pray for ignoble things. He will not pray for more and more worldly pleasures. God has saved me from this problem. I should be grateful to him. So, a devotee, a spiritual seeker, who has developed some spiritual culture, some tendencies, reading books, listening to lectures, etc. And if he prays to God, and if God answers his prayers, then if he has some spiritual culture, he won't be asking for more and more as a businessman, a profit-seeking businessman does. He will feel a kind of sincere gratitude, gratefulness, a feeling of obligation to God, who has answered his prayers, who has been kind towards him. And this sense of gratitude will take him to the higher level of spiritual growth. He will start praying for higher things, not for worldly pleasures, for higher things. At the beginning of spiritual life, he may pray for worldly needs, worldly desires. But if he has got some spiritual culture within, he won't be seeking for more and more of that. He won't be interested in extending this trade relationship with God. He won't like to be a trader in the field of religion. Swamiji uses that word. You should not trade with God. But for Swamiji, in that context, in Bhakti Yoga lectures and elsewhere, speaks of the highest devotion. Such a devotee won't ask for anything. I just want to take your name. That's the sign of highest devotee. Prahlada and many such great devotees that Sri Ramakrishna mentions. But for the ordinary devotee, in a general way, if he asks for some material needs, God will grant. After all, he is not turning elsewhere. He is not knocking at the wrong doors. God is Father, Mother, the whole creation. What is there for you? What is there if you seek his help? Or nothing wrong in it. But a sincere devotee with some spiritual qualifications will not continue this kind of prayer for lowly material comforts. He will feel a sense of gratitude, and this sense of gratitude and this feeling of obligation will elevate him to a higher level of spiritual evolution. That's what Ramanuja says, a very rational and very spiritual interpretation. The evolution of prayers, the psychology of prayers in spiritual life. So then what happens, mind you, Finally, he began to think in his mind. So he had not realized that he was sitting under a wish-fulfilling tree. Now, but this is an empty place, a lonely place. How dangerous it would be if a tiger appears before me. What shall I do? He feared, and tiger appeared before him and killed him. So you can imagine what happens to a person whose worldliness, worldly-mindedness drove him to the lowest level of spiritual and material death. That's what happens. So in an instant, a large tiger jumped upon him and broke his neck and began to drink his blood. In this way, the traveler lost his life. Such is the fate of men in general. If during our meditation you pray for men or women, money or worldly honors or desires are no doubt satisfied to some extent, but mind you, there is a dread of the tiger behind the gifts you get. That's the point. That's why even while praying, we must always keep in our mind these spiritual tendencies intact. If a demon prays for gifts and fulfillment of desires, the fulfillment of that desire will lead to his own destruction. You find in the mythological stories of Hinduism, so many demons, monsters, doing meditation and praying to God. And they were given something, but that very boon led to their destruction. It's something. If an evil person gets an hydrogen bomb in his hand, what will happen? If he has got only small stick, he may not be able to do much harm. But if he gets a mighty weapon, he can do more harm to the world. So also, if a demon, if an evil person with worldly desires, if he gets some celestial power, he will misuse the celestial power for doing more harm to this world. Therefore, the idea is, before we pray, before we ask for any boon from God, any help from God, we must think and we must see that we do not have any selfish motives behind. No selfish desires to be fulfilled. Our mind should be pure. With pure mind, nobody could pray for anything that would be harmful to anybody outside, either him or anybody else. So we will have interaction now. Half an hour, nearly half an hour we have got.
Sometimes I feel like I just can't, I need a break from spiritual practices. And I don't read Kant and I don't read Hegel, but I do read things like science and, other elevated things that can keep my mind up, so I don't go down into lower things. So sometimes, it's almost as if I have to have a little bit of the fish basket. I cannot have a constant flow of wanting to do spiritual things. So can you speak to that, please?
Well, once you realize it is the undesirable thing, then you won't have a desire for it. Once we realize that the flower basket is much more desirable, much more helpful, at that moment our attraction for its opposite will gradually decrease. So continued reading, continued contemplation, continued practice will reinforce the positive tendencies within us, and proportionately the negative tendencies and their power their ability to influence our mind will decrease automatically. This is what really happens in spiritual life. In fact, even in some respect, the ability to introspect and find out, well, I'm developing a tendency for undesirable things. For a spiritual seeker, that is a green signal that he is or she is developing some higher faculty of discrimination. Even the ability, even when you realize that it is a fish basket, then you won't go for it. The fisherwoman did not realize that fish basket was something undesirable. For them, the flower basket was totally undesirable. So once we realize that there is nothing much to be attained in the world of worldly desires, or it is something that will not take us to the highest spiritual goal, then we won't be so much attracted towards it. In the parable, the fisherwomen did not consider the fish basket, the smell coming out of it, as something undesirable. For them, the smell coming from the flower basket was undesirable. In fact, that's right. So that's how mind functions. So first, develop a tendency, a desire, the ability to relish spiritual ideas, spiritual practices. That's what it says. So we must develop a faculty to relish and enjoy spiritual practices. To develop the faculty to enjoy the smell of the flower basket, so to speak. The parable, related to the parable. So we can always develop that. Unless we have some interest in spiritual life, we won't be even listening to these things. That means it can be strengthened, it can be reinforced, it can be enriched for more and more. And this can be done by reading, by listening, by contemplating, somehow keeping the mind in contact with these ideas, living in the world of these ideas. So that will strengthen the desire for higher things.
Swami, I find it helpful to have a large variety of spiritual books on different levels. Some books are very challenging, very hard, and those are just right for certain times. And then there are other books that are sometimes anthologies of quotations from poetry and from mystics, and different books for different times. And there's a small book called How to Seek God by Swami Tattwamayananda. And it isn't, it's challenging, but it has so many quotes and wonderful thoughts in it. And I I found it very helpful recently, just reading it in the morning with my breakfast, and because it isn't too difficult. So I think it's helpful to have a lot of different types of books, have a whole little library of books on spiritual subjects.
True, a kind of intellectual challenging tendency to enjoy intellectual challenges, spiritually challenging ideas. That's good, but that should not be the ultimate goal.
No.
One should be able to go beyond it.
Yes.
But it's a great help for those who have an intellectual bent of mind, who are the habit of reading books, always living the world of intellectually challenging ideas. For them to divert that tendency to a spiritually challenging idea. That's very great. That's a great thing. But that should not be the goal.
No.
That's a state that we should get beyond.
Yes.
An extension of the same question. So, how would you deciding what combination would work best? Is it an individual case-by-case basis, meaning like doing sadhana and doing the actual work versus immersing yourself with reading all this literature? Eventually, one could spend the whole life in reading all these scriptures, Vedas.
Yes. On the one hand, one should stick to one's own path as instructed by the teacher, favorite teacher. On the other hand, you can read whatever you feel is helpful. But once you stick to your own path, then anything that helps you to stick to your own path should be accepted. If any spiritual idea from any religious tradition, from any contributors will be helpful, but there is a way to test their real usefulness. Does it have a weakening effect in my mind? Does it strengthen my belief, my faith? Does it help me to continue my spiritual routine? Or is it a distraction? Anything that distracts our mind from our own chosen path should be avoided. Anything that helps us to hold fast to our own chosen path should be accepted. The Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna is in many ways is a all-round spiritual manual. Yes. So that can be considered to be a supreme guide for practical spiritual life. Other books are certainly helpful. In fact, we will be able to interpret Sri Ramakrishna's ideas, understand his ideas from different angles if we read more and more similar, identical spiritual works from any tradition. Because Sri Ramakrishna doesn't contradict anything. He has an all-encompassing, all-accommodating, positive approach.
So it seems to be that it's an attitude of what our spiritual mood is at the time then. Just whether we want to read something spiritual, whether we want to pray, whether we want to chant, whether we want to meditate, or just kind of contemplate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. And then if we're feeling like we need to have something less spiritual or holy or something like that, then we should go to the highest thing that is less than that we possibly can.
Yeah.
That's good.
Read science or read philosophy or something like that as it, and then of course, the worst would be to just, go turn on a violent movie or something like that in our culture. That would be what is a draw for some people, so.
One point that Sri Ramakrishna stresses can be emphasized in this context. He says a positive spiritual tendency should be converted into a habit. See, what becomes a habit for us becomes natural. See, for a beginner in spiritual life, spiritual practice is something other than our habit. It has got a secondary place. We need to put up an effort to do that. To read a holy book, which may not be very entertaining, it may be highly instructive. For a beginner, it takes a lot of effort and determination to read a holy book, to do spiritual practice. That's why we often procrastinate or postpone, as we said. We are convinced we should do that intellectually. But when we try to do that, mind, as I said yesterday, throws up some challenges. Mind is not willing to cooperate. And we go on finding false excuses for not doing what the mind is not willing to do, but what the intellect is convinced it should do. So this ongoing conflict between mind and intellect, what we want to do and what we normally, automatically, temperamentally do actually in real practice, is our habit. This conflict should be reconciled. So that's why Sri Ramakrishna says, we must develop a tendency, a faculty to relish spiritual ideas, spiritual instructions, and then gradually spiritual practices is still higher. So then it becomes a habit. Because every person has got some habit, some desire. some natural tendency. I mean, the object towards which our mind automatically flows. Suppose we are sitting in a room surrounded by books and magazines. Some of them are very good, some of them may not be so very good, some of them may be very harmful. Nobody is observing, we know very well. What book we automatically read, we are not observed by anybody. Nobody knows what book you are reading. What is the book that we automatically choose to read? In a library, we may take the Encyclopedia Britannica, Critique of Pure Reason, Plato's Dialogues, and there are people watching.
Right.
But in our own room, when we know nobody is watching, what do we choose to read? Because many options are there. The freedom is ours, the choice is ours. Towards what object our mind automatically flows. That is our habit. That's where the mind belongs to. At the same time, before coming to the library, after listening to lectures, we made a decision. We will read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, we will read the Bible or whatever it may be, whatever holy book. That's a decision we have made. We know that's the right thing to do. But when we are alone, our mind moves in another direction. So this conflict, this wide gap between mind and intellect should be bridged. And how to do that? To keep enriching, reinforcing our mind with more and more spiritual tendencies. For that, Sri Ramakrishna gives a prescription, and that is found in all the Vaishnava devotion scriptures. 6 factors are given here. I shall just say this, recite and explain in English. Anugulyasya sankalpaha pradigulyasya varjanam rakshasyadevi vishwasaha goptupta varanam tatha atma nikshepa karpanye shadvidha sharanagati. Means it is kind of self-surrender, the psychology of spiritual self-surrender, so to speak. The first 2 lessons are very important. That's where we begin. For every spiritual beginner has to begin there. One is sticking fast, holding fast to positive, spiritually helpful tendencies, impressions, ideas. An attempt to move towards east. In real terms, if you keep moving towards the east, you need not worry about not moving towards the west. Once you keep moving to the east, you are moving away from the west. You don't have to put up a special effort to avoid moving towards the west. But in spiritual life, this effort is necessary. Why? Because when we keep trying to enrich our mind with more and more positive ideas, positive tendencies, spiritually helpful ideas, there is always the chance that spiritually harmful ideas may also be lurking somewhere in the bush background. As I said, that Antichrist syndrome I mentioned. The archangel was expelled from heaven and he starts a counter-recruiting agency. His job is to drag people away from God's path. So he's somewhere in a corner, you come in this way. In fact, this is the anthropomorphical interpretation of Satan in non-devotional things. In Islam it's called Iblis. Iblis was asked by Allah to go down before man, but he refused to do. He thought himself was great. So Allah punished him. You find in the Hindu mythological tradition, Kali. Kali is the kind of the source of all temptations, evil tendencies, negative tendencies that stand in the way of spiritual life. You find in all traditions, in Buddhist tradition also. Buddha was tempted by Mara. So, along with Anugulyasya Sankalpa means keeping close to spiritually helpful ideas, filling the mind with spiritually healthy tendencies and impressions. We must also try, make a positive effort to avoid its opposite. If we don't do that, we may land in trouble. That's what happened to the man who prayed for many things. finally the tiger came and took him. So that also should be there. So these two fundamental lessons are common for all spiritual seekers in all traditions. First, we must keep ourselves close to the spiritual path. It is not really difficult. We must ask the question, do we really want to lead a spiritual life? Spiritual life should not be one of the innumerable options. See, real spiritual life begins only when we consider it as the only option. It's not one of the several options. Otherwise, little spirituality and several other things. You remember Swami Vivekananda makes an interesting remark. Now we want to buy a new Japanese flower vase. You find it in Swamiji's lectures, you find. So, now the latest fashion, new flower vase just come in the market. That is also we can buy. So religion is also one of the latest fashions. So religion and spiritual life should not be one of the several options. It should be the only one path. Other things we cannot exclude. We have to do our duty in society, in family, in office, as a citizen, as a member of the family. We have to do that. But if we can look upon spiritual life as the fundamental, the royal path of our life, then other tendencies, other duties, other responsibilities can be carried on, even much more efficiently, but with a perfectly calm and tranquil mind. So we must make all others subservient to spiritual ideas. Many of the conflicts arise because we look upon spiritual life as one of the many options that we are looking for. But certainly, even that is a state, just better than never caring for even spirituality, even as an option, as one of the several options. Many people don't look upon spiritual life even as an option at all. So compared to them, those who give at least one minor place and look upon spiritual life as one of the several options, they are certainly higher. That's why Shankaracharya, writing on this Gita Bhashya, as he said, Arto Jijnasur Artharthi Jnani, the one who turns to God in a state of total helplessness, sickness, tragedy, or those who are inquisitive or knowing God, or those who want wealth, comforts, those who want they want their desires to be fulfilled, and also the highest devotee, Jnani, the one who knows that God is only reality. These are the 4 levels of spiritual evolution, devotional evolution. Shankaracharya says, Krishna says, Udara Sarvaya Veda, all these are generous minded people, they are all noble minded people. Shankaracharya said, Utkrishta Cheta, all these people, even those who turn to God out of total helplessness, even looking upon spiritual life as one of the many options, even they are noble hearted. We should not condemn them. Even they are noble hearted, noble minded. Gradually they will evolve to the next phase of spiritual evolution. So one should never get depressed if there are conflicts, no doubt, because spiritual seekers, even those who can withstand a spiritual talk, a prayer, a meditative session, can tolerate reading a holy book at least for half an hour. They are certainly far above some other people who cannot withstand a moment of reading sacred book or listening to sacred ideas. So there is a gradual process of evolution towards a higher and higher level of spiritual life. So we will conclude today. Any more questions? One more? Somebody else wanted?
You mentioned 6 things. You talked about seeking positive values, avoiding negative. Which are the other 4?
I shall explain. It is called the psychology, the 6 principles involved in self-surrender to God's will. It is in Sanskrit, it's called Sharanagati. In Ramanuja's Visishta Advaita philosophy, it is called Prapatti, which means complete self-surrender to God. One is going on meditating, thinking on positive spiritual ideas and impressions. Second one, avoiding the negative ones. Third one, Rakshashridi Vishwasa means a strong belief that God will protect you, God will help you in times of need. Fourth one is accepting God as the only one protector, the one guide, the one protector. God alone is our true friend, true protector, true guide. Fourth one. Fifth one is, a feeling of total, a kind of feeling of derision towards this body consciousness and worldly mindedness which stand in the way of spiritual path. A kind of derision, contempt for worldliness which sometimes creates stumbling blocks in spiritual path. It is the opposite of attraction. See, when we are attracted towards worldly things, we cannot look upon God as only protector. We cannot go on enriching spiritual ideas. We cannot avoid negative ideas. We cannot look upon God as the only guide. So for that, we should have a feeling of derision, a contempt for all non-spiritual worldly ideas and tendencies. And sixth one is Atma Nikshepa. Atma means surrendering oneself to the will of God. So once more, one is positive tendency, holding fast to spiritual ideas with tenacity, and always have a positive outlook to a spiritual ideas. Second one, avoiding the negative tendencies. Third one, there's a strong conviction that God will protect us. Fourth one, a strong conviction that God alone is the only protector, only guide, only help in spiritual life. Fifth one, a feeling of contempt and derision, aversion towards all worldly objects, worldly pleasures. Sixth one, a sense of complete resignation to God's will. These are called 6 disciplines in the psychology of self-surrender. So I hope we have reached our time, so we'll continue the discussion tomorrow. Om Tavakathamudam Tattvajivanam Kavibhirididam Kalmasarpakam Sravanamangalam Srimatadutam Bhuvi Grinanti Bhurita Jana